you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to Mason Studios on YouTube.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, are you enjoying West Tennessee Comic-Con so far? Put your hands together. Yeah, everybody's having a good time. That's what we like to hear. So I want you guys to please join me in giving a very warm welcome to an absolute legend of both the small screen and the big screen. This man's been involved with the Muppets for a very, very long time, a very talented actor and performer. Please put your hands together for Mr. Steve Whitmire. There he is. Yeah, you got one or two. You got one or two people here. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. If you'd like to go ahead and have a seat, that's your mic right there, sir.
How are you guys doing? I already know everybody, I think, right? It's wonderful.
You may have met one or two of them so far.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying your time with West Tennessee so far?
I am.
Excellent.
It's been great. I'm just a Southern boy myself, and
Right.
came up from Atlanta, which is where I actually live.
Oh, okay. You're in Atlanta. Yeah.
So it was an easy trip, and I like being here.
Yeah, well, I think we've got some nice people, and we've got some really good barbecue. If you haven't tried that yet,
I haven't had the opportunity. I was going to do that last night, but I went out with someone who was a vegetarian. It wasn't going to work out.
Oh no!
Yeah, that was my plan last night.
Yeah, well, maybe tonight. Maybe tonight you get some barbecue before you head out.
Yeah,
you should do that.
Or on the road back home.
There you go. That'll work. Yeah. So.
I'll tell you something funny though. I was surprised. I drove past Chattanooga, got around to where you exit for Shelbyville, and I found one of the best Thai restaurants I think I've ever found. I was a little bit surprised. I like Thai food, but it was seriously world-class food. So anyway, enough about food.
Enough about food, that's right. No, we are here to talk about mostly the Muppets, and you've been involved with obviously a lot of stuff over your career, but maybe just for people, I'm sure everybody here knows, but just kind of maybe to reiterate for people that may not know or may not know all about everything you've done, kind of give us some background on how you initially got involved with performing and being involved with the Muppets.
Yeah, well, this is on? I can't hear myself.
Oh, that one.
But maybe you guys can hear me, right?
We'll swap. There you go. You can try that.
We can almost hear each other anyway, right? I was an obsessive fan of the Muppets from the time I can really remember in my whole life. I was born, I grew up throughout the 1960s, and Rolf the dog was already a character on this show called The Jimmy Dean Show. And it was black and white television and all that. And as a little kid, I remember, asking my parents if I could stay up late to watch Rolf on the Jimmy Dean Show. So I was already fascinated by the Muppets, even in those early years of Jim Henson's work. And then Sesame Street came around in about 1968, and I was about 10 or 11 years old. And that was it. I mean, I thought, wow, so I wasn't thinking about a lifetime career, but I really wanted to do something like what these guys were doing with these puppets. So I started trying to build my own puppets, and they were pretty terrible. And from what I could find, there was no internet. It's hard to imagine these days not having a resource like the internet.
Right.
So if you're, this kid outside of Atlanta, how are you going to figure out how to build puppets? You have to just start watching them on TV and trying to just straight figure it out. So I wrote a letter to Jim Henson, who was the creator of the Muppets, at that point. And about 6 months later, he wrote back. So this 10-year-old kid got this letter from Jim Henson, which was really something to me. I mean, it would be something to anybody, but at that point in time, check my mailbox one day, there's a letter from Jim Henson. And he basically just encouraged me to keep doing it. Keep trying to build your puppets, keep doing the things you're doing. So fast forward through, years of being the nerdy puppet guy in high school, I was able to meet Jim when I was 18, and he hired me. So I started with Jim when I was 19, but I was very young, and I had played with puppets and done shows around town all those years. One little tiny television thing, local in Atlanta. But this was back in the days when there were only like 4 television channels. The 3 major networks, PBS, and then this guy in Atlanta started, do anybody remember the UHF antennas? If you're old enough to remember, there's like this little round thing you had to put on top of your TV to pick up the signal. Scratchy, terrible, you had to tune it in. It was awesome.
That was old school right there.
It really was. We were a UHF channel that broadcast out of an office building, so we had an 8-foot ceiling. And I would lie on my back and do this puppet for 2.5 hours a day, taking telephone calls. Wow. It was a call-in show with a puppet character. and just had a blast. Had so much fun. One of my favorite things I ever did. And that led into meeting Carol Spinney, who was the puppeteer for Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, and he kind of recruited me into Jim's company.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, so Jim Henson, absolute legend. What was it like when you started working under him and kind of learning from him, and what skills did you pick up from him?
Well, so much. You know, I had kind of from the outside of the Muppets watched everything they've done that I could possibly see throughout those years of television. And you know, my mom subscribed to TV Guide magazine, which like a paper magazine that came in the mail, and I would always throw this thing open every time it came in to see if there was anything in there in the news about a new Muppet thing, a special or an appearance. And of course, not very often, but then something would show up, and I'd write it down and I'd tell all my friends. It was such a big deal. And so I kind of felt like I knew a lot about the Muppets when I came to work for Jim, and I did, but it was all this objective kind of outside of what I was witnessing rather than being inside of it and being a part of it. So I had a lot to learn, and Jim did the perfect thing for someone like me, which was he brought me in to work on the Muppet Show. It was at the height of the popularity of that show, and so I was surrounded by his core people. Frank Oz, who did Miss Piggy, Fozzie, and Yoda, and all these other great characters. Jerry Nelson, the most masterful voice artist that we ever had, as well as a great puppeteer, and Richard Hunt, all these people who were wonderful, wonderful performers. So I really got to learn at 19 years old. It was like going to Muppet University. You know, I had these guys working in front of me every day, and I got to work alongside them as well, but I really could learn each of their individual styles of performance and of puppetry and what they brought to it. So I kind of got to learn a mixture of all of that before it kind of melded into my own style.
Obviously, unfortunately, when Jim passed away, you were the one that got to take over the role of Kermit the Frog. And what was that experience like, taking over such an iconic character?
Well, it was really scary. I had worked with Jim for about 12 years at that point. And, you know, it was intimidating. I mean, everybody knew Kermit, and not only did they know Kermit, Jim was really the, you know, being the guy who came up with the Muppets, was the person that was identified with the Muppets, and certainly identified as being Kermit. So it was super important to me that Kermit stay based on exactly what Jim's foundation for it was. And I would have never even been able to approach it had it not been for the fact that I worked with him. It's like, it's trying to continue this really almost like a person, like an individual that everybody knows, because everybody knew who Kermit was, as seamlessly as possible without there being a total change. And the only way you can do that is if you know exactly where he came from. You know, you worked with the guy alongside the guy who was doing it and created it. So that was vital. It was really vital. I always felt like the Muppets are like a lineage thing, you know, when possible, and it hasn't been done very much, but when the characters can be passed by the original puppeteer, when they must be, to someone new, it's nice if that person knows the original. And hopefully that kind of keeps the spirit alive and the influence involved as long as possible.
Right. No, I think you did an incredible job carrying on that legacy. I mean, did you guys give a round of applause? You did an incredible job. Now, obviously, I think everybody probably has like their favorite Muppet, and I'm sure you do too. So maybe it might be a two-part question to this, or maybe it's the same Muppet. But which Muppet is your personal favorite, and then which one do you think you connect with the most?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a good two-part question, because my favorite character to perform that I've ever done was Rizzo the Rat. This little snarky little rat character. Because he's this snarky little rat character. He's fun. You know, he's mischievous and he's, you know, a little edgy. He's really the polar opposite of a character like Kermit. My favorite character prior to being part of the Muppets was probably Kermit and Jim's characters. I was always drawn to his characters. But yeah, Rizzo's certainly the favorite. And, you know, obviously, having the opportunity to continue a character like Kermit is important. I got to, the most fun thing with that was to be able to walk into a room full of people, like maybe here, with that character sometimes, and be able to soak up the reaction. And I can't take credit for that because it was really Jim, right? But to be able to feel that feeling that people have for that character is really amazing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think was probably the most challenging character that you had to perform in your entire career?
Well, there's challenging because it's big and heavy and awkward and hard to do, so it's uncomfortable. There's some of those. I did a polar bear character once called Jake on a kind of an obscure show called Jim Henson's Animal Show. It was this huge polar bear puppet that he was built in such a way that he was the tallest character on screen. So I could reach the height, when I'm standing doing this thing, and the weight of the puppet's head, kind of rests on top of your hands sometimes. It's a big, huge thing like an umbrella. But the problem was, for him to look at the other characters, I had to have my hand like that all the time. Because he's looking down at everybody else because he's so tall. Which means, that hurts when you do it for 10 minutes, even if you don't have a puppet on your hand. So I got this heavy weight pushing down on top of my hand, trying to do this. So I had all these cramps and arm problems. But I still love doing it. But really challenging, I keep using the same answer, was probably trying to step in to be Kermit. That's the most challenging part because it was just so important to me to keep Jim's influence in it. And that's a very hard thing to do. It's also at a point when the characters were selling to big corporations and stuff like that, and that's not their thing. They don't, you tell them how important Jim's influence is, and they're like, okay, we don't care. They do, but they don't. It's not the bottom line. So it was challenging to keep that spirit alive.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you again did a great job with it for sure. Now, I will ask you this: my personal favorite Muppets movie is Treasure Island.
Yeah.
So that's a great one right there. Do you have any fond memories of working on that film?
Of that one?
Yeah.
Well, one of the best memories is having the chance to work with Tim Curry.
Absolutely.
That was extremely cool. That's like the best thing ever. I was a huge fan when I was in high school. I was a big Rocky Horror fan. So I certainly knew all about Tim, and I don't know if you're not a gigantic Tim Curry fan, you might not know that he kind of had a rock and roll singer career right after Rocky Horror. He did like 4 or 5 albums, and I loved his music. So anyway, I'm a super fan. So to have the opportunity to be working alongside him and really got to know him. We're still occasionally in contact. Once in a while we get to talk, and I'm hoping to drag him to a Comic-Con sometime and do a screening of Muppet Treasure Island together. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, maybe we can get him to come to Tennessee.
Hey,
that would be awesome. Yeah.
Who knows? He had a stroke a few years ago. He had some health issues, but frankly, I had the great pleasure of catching up with him about a year ago in a quick, like a Zoom telephone call kind of deal, and he's fine. He's just Tim Curry. He hasn't. I think he uses like a wheelchair just for convenience, but he's really his old self, and he's just absolutely fine. Sense of humor is all still there, and Tim's still right there, So I hope we get to hang out sometime.
Yeah, he's an absolute icon.
He's
I
the
love
best.
love Tim Curry.
Remember a song in that film called Professional Pirate?
Oh yes.
He's standing there singing about being a pirate, and it's Tim Curry at his best, just blasting out with that voice. And most of the time when we do films, we would pre-record the music. Most of the dialogue we do live with the puppets or whether it's Tim Curry or whoever. But they had done a pre-record of his voice, but he was singing it anyway. It didn't matter. It's like coming out the same. So I wasn't even working that day. And all of our sets are built up about 42 inches off the floor. So he's on the side of this kind of beachfront thing singing the song. I came in that day just to sit down there in the pit and watch him. He's like right there, belting out this song, with all the power that he's got in his voice. I'll never forget it.
Obviously, there's a lot of people who have like theories online of they'll be talking about some of their favorite films or films that they would like to see get remade with the Muppets. And so I'm curious if are there any franchises or like big blockbuster movies that you think would work well if they were to be given a remake? Where it's like one human character and then everyone else in the movie's Muppets.
I've been asked that before, and the only answer I ever come up with, and it's just a silly answer. Does anybody know the movie Heat? With Al Pacino and Robert De Niro? That's one of my favorite films. There's a scene, if you've never seen this film, see it, because Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are great. I just think it'd be a great scene for Kermit to play alongside somebody.
Right.
I think Kermit's probably Al Pacino.
Oh, he's got to be. He's got to be Al Pacino.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It's a great movie. There's a classic scene in there. Yeah. Anyway, there are probably others, but that one really stands out to me.
My vote, I'm a hardcore Lord of the Rings fan.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it should ever get a remake. I think the Peter Jackson films are perfect.
Yeah.
That would be the only acceptable remake. Would be if it was Muppets, a Muppet remake of Lord of the Rings.
Well, we went through that time frame with Treasure Island, Christmas Carol before it, where we did a couple of classic stories. And it was always fun to sit around in a room with people and cast the characters in classic stories, because they fall in, they all fall into these archetypal characters. But I think the choice was kind of made not to keep doing that, because it would have been too easy. We really wanted to get back to trying to do something that was a Muppet story.
More original.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Great. Well, guys, I know y'all are dying to ask some questions here. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to get up and come around there, and you guys put your arms way up in the air if you have a question. So go ahead. Hold them there for a really long time. So that's right.
Yeah. Is there a character that you wanted to give more airtime, but just for one reason or another couldn't do it, or was difficult to master?
Yeah, well, I mean, I sort of feel that way about Rizzo, because when the point in time happened that we lost Jim, and I started doing Kermit, Kermit was a part of every Muppet thing there was, and he was at the core of it, and I was doing mostly Kermit all the time. Which meant that if Rizzo was in the scene, someone else would do the puppeteering, and I would go back and dub the voice. So it was always like a cathartic release for me to then, get to put on Rizzo and do something totally opposite. So I would love to have done more exploration with him. Character stuff. I always wanted, we sort of touched on him and Gonzo living together in the same house in real life. But I always wanted to, I share an apartment, like The Odd Couple. But I always wanted to make more out of that. I just think Rizzo would have been like, the worst thing about this is all the feathers. There's feathers everywhere. I don't care if he brings chickens home, but the feathers, it's terrible. I think that would have been really fun.
All right, and I think we have another question over here. Yes, ma'am.
How did you learn to do the voices?
Well, it's funny because people talk about being a voice actor, and I don't think of myself as being a voice actor really. Because what I loved was the puppetry, the puppeteering, right? And so each character had to have a voice, and so you just sort of see what voice fits in. But a lot of it for me was watching what the Muppets were doing. Because in many cases, their characters were just extensions of the puppeteer's own voice. I mean, Kermit's a little bit more extreme than Jim's voice, but it's similar. Jerry Nelson was the master of that. He has so many characters and so many voices, and oftentimes it was just his voice slightly changed, But it was less about learning it, and it was more about thinking about who the character was. What kind of character is he? What would he sound like? What are his... And a lot of it for me, I know with Wembley Fraggle, when I did Fraggle Rock, his voice, it was a voice that I was comfortable with, but the real true character came out of finding out how Wembley would laugh, oddly. And a lot of times with characters, I've figured out how they would laugh at something, and the laugh led me into what their voice sounded like. Sounds weird, but it kind of worked. Wembley was... He sounds a lot like Rizzo. Only Rizzo's got the New Yorkie kind of accent. But that's a voice, I think everybody, if they pursue it, has 2 or 3 voices that they could probably do. You might have a deep voice or a falsetto voice or a growly voice. Everybody's got them. You just have to not be afraid to look stupid when you do them. just go for it, And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't,
Cool, great question. I've got several questions here. We'll start with this gentleman right here.
How are you doing today?
Good. Did you play in the movie Dark Crystal?
I did. That was one of the hardest films we ever did, and one of the most gratifying to do because it was hard. Dark Crystal was this huge thing. Jim started working on that like 5 years before we shot it to create the whole world and what it was going to be like. Working with Brian Froud, the artist who did all the sketches of the different characters and designed the characters. Huge film. And I did a lot of things in it. Mostly I did one of the Skeksis characters. And They were, I remember telling my wife while we were working on this, remind me how much pain I'm in, because I'm going to forget. We decided it was like, I've heard women say that in childbirth, it's very painful, but you kind of forget the pain. It's like that. They were these big characters that were built on harnesses that we wore. And so you're inside of there, your arm's like this, which is, okay, that's pretty comfortable doing the mouth. And the other hand was running these mechanical hands. And then somebody else would creep up inside of there and do the other hand if it needed to be run. And then all of the facial features were run by basically bicycle cables, like the brake cables on bicycles. You'd pull and push this cable and the eyes would blink, or they would turn, or there'd be a little pulsing vein in the side of the face. Or it was all done by these little things. So there's 8 people underneath you with all these little things following you around all the time. So very awkward and cumbersome. And this harness fit. They didn't want to put the weight on our shoulders, which sounds right, because your shoulders are going to hurt. So they put the weight on our hips. The only problem was when you strap these things on super tight, it really hurt, like on top of your hip bones, So after about a week, we all had blisters on our hips. It was terrible. It was terrible. But looking back at that film, if I'm not mistaken, I think it really very well may be the only film of its size, a big feature film that was done with all puppets, which is just insane. If you think about it, I mean, it was so complicated, and we were going for a style of puppet movement that was much smaller than what the Muppets did, much more realistic, like living, breathing animals and characters and things, whereas the Muppets are a little bit more zany and abstract. So a lot of that technique in my own work, I sort of took back into the Muppets, and the Muppets became a little bit more living, breathing characters to me, which I enjoy doing. I like really believing that they're alive, There's many ways to do that, but Dark Crystal helped with that a lot.
Hey, I hope this won't be a tedious question. You were talking about your creative process, stemming the development of the voice from the laugh. I'm wondering, when you're creating a character, do you spend a lot of time walking around the house having conversations with yourself, kind of exploring it? Or
it's funny you should say that. I never thought about it very much until since I left the Muppets. I did this character called Weldon the IT guy. You may have seen it, you may not have seen it. If you haven't, find it. It's on YouTube. I'm not doing it anymore, but I did it for about 3 years. He was this little troll, like this little furry creature, very curmudgeonly. He's like Rizzo times 10. He's like a very grouchy little guy. He doesn't really like people very much, but he's doing a call-in show where people call in and he says, he wants to know what your most miserable life experiences were. So that was the basis of this call-in show we did on YouTube. And then we did a bunch of production numbers with him, which are actually the best thing to watch. Anyhow, this is the first puppet that I had built in maybe 30 years, because there are people who do it better than I do, and I never built puppets with Muppets, really. So I found that, and this is within the last 10 years that I did this, as I'm building the puppet and coming up with how I'm going to build it, I'm rehearsing with the puppet. I'm thinking about the puppet. How's he going to sound? What's he going to say? And the voice and his attitude, and all of that was happening. It really was an interesting creative process if you think about it. It's almost like he's being formed both physically and emotionally at the same time. And I'd never really thought about it in that way, but I found that really useful. And I find in many cases, some of the best puppeteers are people who also started out at least building their own puppets, because they know these puppets from the inside out, and Jim was funny, he would have people build puppets for him, like at the Dark Crystal. He did this character called Jen, who was one of the Gelflings, and the inside of that puppet was terrible. I don't mean, no disrespect to whoever built it, but all the mechanics that were inside these heads of these guys were like up against Jim's hand, all these metal gears and bolts, and he just did it anyway. And everybody else was trying to pat him out, make him comfortable, so he could stand it. But he put up with whatever he had to put up with. But anyway.
Okay, my question is, I think that in the history of the world, I believe that you play a key role in children's storytelling.
Oh, nice.
From your perspective, what is missing from today's children's TV?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I look at a show like Sesame Street, and it's changed so much from what it was when it first started, and you would expect it to evolve over time. But these days, I don't watch the show these days, but my understanding is that it has a lot less activity on the street. A lot more animation, a lot less puppets, but also a lot less people. And a lot of that is because it's more expensive to produce that part of the show. So you could say part of what's missing is the money, but that's not really it. I think it's certainly on a show like that, I think it's the feeling of community, the feeling of all the people who live. For me, Sesame Street, even at 10 years old, when I was a kid, was a real place. In my mind, in my fantasy mind, I always felt like that once the show went off the air, if you knocked on that trash can, Oscar was going to pop up and tell you to stop, you know. It felt like a real place.
But Sesame Street is a real place.
Well, but it feels slightly less so now than it did then, to me, anyway. That it's not even imagination that's missing. I think, but I like the feeling of the camaraderie of the community of people. You know, that connection between people, and that's not always missing. But sometimes it is, or it's treated a little. At least for me, it's hard for me to say because for little kids it might be fine. But in my mind, I watch some of what I see on television for kids, and it just feels kind of patronizing in a way. It feels like they're talking down to the kids. And Sesame Street certainly never did that. You know, when Jim and Frank were doing Ernie and Bert, they were doing what they thought was funny for them. They were laughing while they were doing this, and it just so happened they were teaching people the alphabet. But they were doing silly things that made them laugh, you know. So there's a great deal of depth to those characters beyond just whatever they were saying on the surface. You know, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Do we have anybody on this side that had a question? I think I saw. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Steve. I'm a longtime Fraggle Rock fan.
We talked about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a two-part question. First, what was your favorite song to do as Wembley Fraggle?
Okay.
And then, if you hadn't been Wembley, which other character would you have liked to have been in Fraggle Rock?
That's a great question. Let me start with that one because we normally didn't officially audition or hold auditions for characters with Jim. On the Muppet Show, it was a process of we need this many puppets, so you take that one, you say, you grab this one. You could grab the one you wanted sometimes and do whatever you like. And they would kind of assign, like if there was an opening number on the show that somebody was going to sing, I might do it, or Jerry might do it, and we'd find people who wanted to do it. But with Fraggle, when that show came along, they decided to hold what Dave Goelz and I termed as like fake auditions. So they brought us all into a room with mock-ups of the original characters, and we all tried different characters. And so they separated it between the female puppeteers and the male puppeteers to do characters accordingly. Made sense at that point. But I think I tried Boober, I might have tried Gobo, but I talked to Jerry Jewell was one of Jim's original co-creators from way back in the 60s with the Muppets, and he was the head writer on Fraggle Rock and one of the primary forces behind creating that show. And Jerry kind of later admitted to Dave and I that they sort of already knew who they wanted to do each character, and they designed the characters around specific people. And I really was Wembley at that point. I was this young, hyper, kind of hummingbird, metabolism kid, and couldn't make up my mind about things. And so all of that went into being that character. So I'm not sure I would have wanted necessarily to. I would have done anything they asked me to do, but I was suited for that character. So I'm glad I got that character. And by the way, my favorite thing to do with Wembley were the scenes where he had no dialogue in the scene. I had no lines to memorize or anything. And you'll see Wembley, like Red and Gobo are talking, and Wembley's right behind him. And he's just listening to their conversation. He'll stand there and he'll listen, and he'll think about what Red says, and he'll discount it, or he'll say, oh, that makes sense. Just being upstaging in the background, I love that so much. What was your other question about Frank?
What song was your favorite?
Favorite song was anything I got to sing with Jerry. I loved Wembley and Gobo singing together. There's one called The Wimbledon Fool, I think, that they do. There's many. We did many together. I had somebody say to me one time that the Fraggle sound of the characters on that show, in their ear, they were a musician, and they said they cast it as musical instruments. And they said Wembley always sounded like a saxophone to them. I thought, well, that's kind of a compliment. I like that. But yeah, anything I got to sing with Jerry because he was a great singer, and I was really good at finding the harmony parts to songs. I could hear that, and so whenever we got to play with that, it was great fun. Jerry used to say, when I would do the harmony parts, we'd do them together live, and he'd say, "I hate you for being able to do that," you know. But it was just I was able to do that. You know?
Did you happen to have voiced anybody in The Labyrinth?
Did I? I think I probably, no specific character with names. Most of the characters in that film, the voices were dubbed by British actors after the fact. We did the puppetry and other people did it. For whatever reason, Jim just was trying to look for a slightly different sound, you know, that was not quite like the Muppets. So I don't know that I did. I might have done like big group scenes where they need a lot of hubbub voices, you know, just a lot of noise. But I don't think so in Labyrinth. I did in The Dark Crystal, but not in Labyrinth. But I just had so much fun doing those characters. The goblins and, you know, the four faces on the door. I did one of those guys. And so we would do it and do the lines, and then someone else would dub it in many cases.
All right, anybody else? Anybody back here? Yes, sir, right here.
Do you want to ask? No, you can ask. Okay. Do you maybe have like a favorite memory or favorite story, like behind the scenes stuff? Was there like a very special moment where you just like had to take a step back and realize what you guys were doing, how great things were? Or was there like something that just brought such a smile to your face?
Well, there were a lot of those. You know, some of them you really get a lump in your throat. I remember shortly after I began doing Kermit, they had Kermit at Oxford University in England to do like their big commencement speech in front of this group called the Oxford Union, which is a big deal. And they'd never had a puppet before. I mean, it's always taken very seriously and very stuffy, and you know. And there was a lot of controversy around it because some of the more academic people were saying, "Oh, this is, you know, you can't have Kermit the Frog as the speaker at the Oxford Union," and yet the students were loving the idea. And so it's this giant old, hundreds of years old wooden hall with all these different levels. You know, it's like the Globe Theater, you know, something. And it's full of all these people, all these students. And they're you know, making noise before the show starts. And then we have a stage right down in the middle of the floor. We're like a speck. And Kermit was being interviewed by a very famous actress over there. We just talk about the world and things in the world. And just before it started, they were going to dim the lights. And then they were going to introduce Kermit, and he would be. And then that gave me the chance to put Kermit into place without making him look like a puppet. I was working inside of a, like behind a wall. And so we put Kermit up there, and then there was this massively long pause where the lights didn't work. And it was like, oh, there was a technical problem. But my microphone was live. So Kermit said something like, I don't remember what it was, but something like, oh, is there a problem? And because the mic was live, it went out through the house, and they just erupted in cheering. And because it was this, you know, many hundreds of years old building, it started to shake. It was like, oh, scary. The whole hall was shaking. And it was just, I got this lump in my throat, like, oh my God, this is huge. We're in pitch black darkness, and this is going on all around me. You know? So that was a pretty big deal. Meeting the Queen was cool. But you know, we've done big things like that where you think, oh, I can't believe I'm here. Once in a while, there'd be a particular, you know, celebrity that I grew up with, that I'm working with, suddenly, and they're standing there. That can be a big deal. But a lot of it really for me was in the early years was just realizing that without ever having to actually make a lot of effort to end up with the Muppets, I ended up there. You know, and I wasn't even really looking for a career or a job with the Muppets when it came to me. You know, it was offered to me at a point where I never expected it would happen. You know, I was doing my own puppet things in Atlanta, and I loved the Muppets, but I didn't think I wasn't looking for a job with the Muppets, you know. And it became almost 40 years, you know, so it's a big deal.
I believe this young lady back here has a question.
Hi, so nowadays, this is kind of hard to word, but nowadays, like, with films, they mainly rely on like CGI and everything, and practical effects isn't like, it's more of like a kind of what's the word, like, I can't think of a word, but
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, it's not as common anymore. And like, if you really find someone that can do it, like, it's like nowadays with films, like versus like in the 80s and the 90s, like they did so much more practical effects.
Yeah.
And at least how I've seen in my own research, like it's, you kind of just see less of it nowadays. And I was wondering, what would your motivational words or something like that for people like artists nowadays, puppeteers that want to get into the field, and what's your motivation for yourself that helps you keep going and do your passion?
Well, I feel like in all sorts of media, there's room for both of those art forms, and I love the idea of combining both together. I tried to do a little bit of that on this cave-in thing I was telling you about for YouTube, although very limited. We really couldn't do much CGI, but a lot of film tricks in that. But I love, it's very hard to see the Muppets walk. I mean, you can do it. You can put people in green suits and somebody can manipulate the legs. Well, I used to say, we really don't do legs, because you mostly see the Muppets from the waist up. You believe that they're standing on the ground, but you don't really see that. But I think there could be some really cool things where you combine, like you do the bottom half of the puppet with CGI, and you do from the waist up as a regular puppet, or something like, there are ways to combine all of that together that could benefit the puppetry, and would be kind of cool for the CGI, because there's still really, a lot of times they still use puppeteers to stand in with actors so that they can play a scene off of something real, and then they cover it with CGI, So I remember one time Kermit was asked that question while I was doing Kermit, and they said, so what do you think about CGI, And Kermit's response was something like, well, let me show you what this interview would look like if I was CGI, and I just ducked him out of sight, And the guy cracked up, when I did that, and I said, and from below he said, so this is what you'd be seeing if you were interviewing me and I was CGI, So they kind of got the point, So I don't know. I mean, some of it's amazing. Some of it I find difficult to watch because it just doesn't quite move right. But then sometimes puppets are difficult to watch too because they don't move right either. So, the best at doing whichever it is, I think will always have some place. I think it's possible that they can always have a place in the industry. I hope.
All right, and let's see.
And then there's AI. So what is that going to be?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Jim personally ask you to be the next Kermit, or how did that conversation go?
No. We never spoke about it, which is really weird because we were having all sorts of conversations about a lot of, let me back up just a second. My early years with Jim, I was a kid and he was on a pedestal. He was my hero. So it took me years to get to the point where we had kind of like an adult interaction, because I was 18 or something, And so we were kind of falling into that place at the point when he passed away. And we were talking about all kinds of stuff. He wanted me to start producing and directing. And it's something, and not because I asked, because I was fine doing what I was doing, But I guess he always tended to see potential in people that they didn't see in themselves. And we were talking about other projects and new ideas and new characters and many, many things. But Kermit wasn't a part of that conversation because he didn't know that he was going to die, obviously. It was an unexpected, kind of a tragic thing. But evidently, from what I heard from his wife, Jane, he had come to Frank Oz, who was his right-hand person, and said this to Jane also. Because he was at that point in 1989-90 selling his company to the Walt Disney Company, which didn't happen when he died, but he was in the middle of that deal. He had said, I think I might become too busy to continue to be Kermit, because he was coming in at that point like a new creative force within Disney. There was no Pixar, there was no John Lasseter, none of that had happened yet. He was going to be that person. To revitalize Disney, in a certain sense, with all these ideas. So he really wanted to pursue new stuff, and he wanted to make sure the Muppets were in good hands, or on good hands, as the case may be. So he had said to them, I think, my understanding from her was that he had said, if I become too busy to do this, I might ask Steve to try to step in and do Kermit. So that was the extent of it. Oh, he never talked to me about it. And I stood in a couple times with Kermit, but certainly didn't do the voice or anything. But as I said, I was always drawn to his characters. I felt a kinship with that character. And again, what was super important to me was that it always evolved from where it started. That you never lose that essence of Jim in it. But again, he didn't ask directly. So afterwards, I found out all this other stuff that he'd been talking about it, at least to mention.
All right, guys.
Very flattering.
I think we got time for maybe just a couple more questions. Let's see this gentleman right here.
Yeah, Steve, just a couple of quick ones. Online discussion was talking about how Tim Curry played Long John Silver as if he was a Muppet. You know?
Yes,
yeah. Right, and then Michael Caine played Ebenezer Scrooge as if everyone was a regular actor. He didn't treat them like Muppets at all, and they both worked perfectly. Right. If you had any good Michael Caine stories. And also, I just want to say I'm a huge Muppets Tonight fan, and I love the way that you guys tried different stuff with that show.
Yeah, I like that show too. I look back at the pieces of that show. It didn't get much of a chance on the air, but I think it was really good. It was a good. I felt like it was a nice next step for something like the Muppet Show, in a way.
I think it's on an audience now on screen.
Yeah, it's going to be like Dark Crystal. It wasn't a big deal when it happened. Now it's going to have a cult following, I think. You know, Michael Caine's story. I think I told somebody may have heard this because I was telling somebody this yesterday, I think. But Michael Caine is obviously this amazing, accomplished actor, and I knew I was going to be working with him. So I'm in Atlanta, getting ready to go work with Michael Caine. And I saw an episode of Inside the Actor's Studio. I don't really remember that show. Michael Caine was being interviewed about all kinds of things, but one of the things was his acting technique. And one of the things first of all, he was talking about memorizing his lines. That the night, up until the night before, he goes over and over. He just keeps rehearse. So he's got that dialogue. And I thought, oh boy, I can't screw up. I got to be good. I got to up my game here. Because when we work, we've got the monitor there. If we want to, we can take the script on the side, and we can if we forget a line, we can read it as we're working. But I thought in this case, I better memorize this. Plus, it was straight out of the book. Most of it. It was like all straight out of the Charles Dickens original book, so it wasn't changing constantly. So I memorized the lines. But one of the things he also said on that show was that you'll notice whenever I do a close-up, I don't blink during close-ups. I think it's distracting. I keep focused and my eyes never blink. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So one of the first things when I met him, Kermit said to him was, by the way, I just want you to know I'm with you. You'll notice that I never blink. And of course he laughed and we got off on the right foot, But he was terrific. I mean, and the fact that he played it so stern, so straight, and yet he's a terrific guy with a wonderful sense of humor. He loved Beaker. He would laugh out loud at Beaker. Just Beaker sitting there, Beaker would look at him, he'd crack up.
All right, any other questions, guys? We've got some up front here. Let's see. Yes, sir.
Okay, it works. I'm not sure if you play D&D. Do you do Dungeons
not really. Not really. I'm aware of it. But
Okay. There was a concept online going around about the Muppets playing D&D.
Oh, yeah.
And cutting between the campaign, them around a table doing a campaign, and then the actual campaign, and it was celebrities.
Oh, I got you.
Coming out of the voice, it would be Miss Piggy being a barbarian, and then it would cut, and the barbarian was Terry Crews, still speaking like Miss Piggy.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I love it.
So I was wondering if there are any celebrities. I guess basically what I'm asking is there a celebrity that would be really funny to hear in Kermit's voice or Rizzo's voice?
Wow. I'm sure there are. I'm trying to think of somebody. I don't have anybody off the top of my head. I haven't thought about that before. Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. Sorry.
No, it's all
I'm
right.
totally stumped. Now I can't think of any celebrities. But it's a fun idea. I will say that there was a time frame where there was a real lull in Muppet production, sort of like there is now. But we were coming up with concepts, but we weren't doing anything. This was since Disney purchased the characters, and that's when the memes came out, the Lipton memes with Kermit with a T, and then people were signing all these things to Kermit. And some of them were, pretty racy. And so, Disney was a little taken back by that. But I remember saying, I said, look, if we're not doing production, people are going to take it away from us. They're going to do whatever they want to do with the characters, They're going to come up with ideas. So they won't own it, but they'll still do it, So I think that, I think the Muppets being a part of pop culture in that way is fun,
Yes, Tim. Okay, there it goes. I've been fighting with this mic this whole panel. We want to thank all you guys for coming out. Steve, if you don't mind, could you maybe tell everybody where they can follow you at on the social media?
Sure. Actually, the main social media that I do really post anything on is Instagram. And it's basically, if you come by my booth, you can hit the QR code. However, my table. But it's Steve_Whitmire, so it's super simple.
Yeah, go follow him, guys. You got to go follow him.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd appreciate it. And if if you're wandering around with nothing to do some night, look up the playlist of production numbers on Cave-In with Weldon the IT Guy on YouTube. I wouldn't necessarily, the shows are fun, but you kind of had to be there. It's like an hour of this character talking to people on the phone, basically. So you sort of had to be there. But the production numbers, I think, are really good, considering we had no budget, barely had a studio. I was doing all the lines and all the characters, so I think it's fun. I'd appreciate everybody seeing that.
All right, guys. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.